F sharp, A sharp, revisited.
Hello everyone and welcome to
F sharp, A sharp, Revisited,
the music review podcast
where
we talk
about
about new music releases every now and then. I am Joe, the music critic, reasonable person. and with me is the upstanding citizen Nick. See, you just said something very nice about yourself.
Oh, curses, I've been tricked.
Yes,
Hi everyone.
we are back.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done proper new music talking. Yeah, we've got two months worth of new music to talk about.
Yes.
So naturally, we're not going to talk about most of it.
Yeah, we have been very selective.
Yeah, we've whittled it down to 4.
Yes, 4 main albums that we're going to talk about. The first of which is Dedicated by Rae Jepson. 15 songs, 48 minutes. I think the most striking thing about this album is how consistently on point Jepson is with her pop sensibilities. The hooks nearly always hit, and the instrumentation is tight pretty much all the way through. It's really hard to really pick out a stretch in the album where there's much of a lull, and I think that's part of the big appeal of this album.
I disagree. I think the latter half of the album contains pretty much the same old boring radio pop I'd expect, and the bolder moments just sort of fall a bit flat. Whereas the first half of the album contains some of the best radio pop I can think of, full stop.
See, I thought it was pretty much the same quality throughout.
Well, I'm glad that you think that.
Fight! Time for us to fight.
I think that Want You in My Room through to Happy Not Knowing is a contender for the greatest 3-song run on any album in recent memory. Those 3 songs could all quite easily make it into my top 5 songs of the year.
I mean, Want You in My Room, yes, but Everything He Needs and Happy Not Knowing?
Yeah, Happy Not Knowing is
not so
absolute
much.
banger.
It's
of course,
all right.
it's so good. Of course, all 3 of those songs is so good. All of those just make me feel like pounded with romance.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's the 3 tracks after Happy Not Knowing that I think is probably the best stretch of the album. I'll Be Your Girl, Too Much, and The Sound. They're probably that's the best stretch, because I'll Be Your Girl has this really odd dubby waltzy feel, which is very weird, and it works really well. And The Sound has this beautifully serene piano backing that's harmonically just very rich, and it adds a layer of mystery to the song. It's probably the best example of probably more elaborate instrumentation in the album that just works really well.
And Too Much?
Too Much. It's a very good pop song.
Yeah, that's my least favourite on the album. Too Much to me, just it sadly reminds me too much that Taylor Swift exists. I think it's just treading that tightrope between, good pop and bad pop, and it just annoys me ultimately. It's just it just reminds me of how much I hate that woman.
I mean, I probably hate Taylor Swift more than you do, but Too Much didn't.
I think some of the instrumentals on the album, especially in the latter half towards the end, they just sort of they plod along and they provide nothing better or new compared to the earlier tracks on the album. And I also think that it feels like it's wrapping up, and then there are 2 tracks remaining, and the single just feels really tacked on to the end of the album.
Except Party for One is probably the best song on the album.
I
Party
disagree.
for One, you don't care about me. It's so fun and springy.
The mock strings in that song are just, I don't like them.
It's a lovely track.
I don't think it's the worst track on the album by any stretch, but I don't think it's great. I think it could have come earlier in the album and had more of an effect.
It's a great track, and Real Love is another really great track as well.
Real Love is decent.
It's got the best lyrics on the album. I've got a feeling the writing's on the wall. I've got the feeling you were the writing after all.
One thing I'll say is that Rae Jepson is known for singing exclusively about love and romance, and that does not change here. Every single track is about that. But I think on the album overall, it does feel very tangible. It's like this album is just full of abandon, and it's great fun to listen to. Like, it sounds like the first month of a relationship, but in musical form.
Yeah,
and it's just fun.
It's fun in that way. Before I move on to any other points, just because I've read out a lyric, I'll read out my 2 other favourite lyrics in the album. on No Drug Like Me, I've got If You Make Me Feel in Love, Then I'll Blossom for You, which I think is
You
just
make me feel in love, then I'll blossom for you.
it's just a lovely one-liner that I like. And then Want You in My Room has I just want to get a little bit closer and I'll press you to the pages of my heart.
That's so
It's
good.
just very romantic.
I want you in my room, on the bed, on the floor. I want you in my room, I don't care anymore. I want to do bad things to you. Slide on through my window. I want you in my room. Baby, don't you want me to?
Nick's gonna go courting with that song now.
It is very possibly my favourite song of the year. I've listened to that one track so many times.
It's a really fun song. It's a fun, cheeky song, and it's nice. I do like that song quite a bit.
I like the way that she uses second person on that song. Like she's singing to you. It makes me feel loved.
Oh.
Another thing I want to mention is that I've always maintained on this podcast that Hayley Williams is the queen of vocal melodies, but I think Carly Rae Jepsen is like she would be in line to the throne. I'm very fond of her vocal performances.
Yeah, her vocal performances are always great in this album, especially now that I found you. In the bridge, she just in the last line, she like really belts it out, and it's good.
For favourite tracks
good.
on the album, I've already mentioned the 3-song stretch from Want You in My Room, Everything He Needs, Happy Not Knowing, No Drug Like Me that you mentioned the lyric from, I also think is incredibly infectious to listen to. And then the song Feels Right is, I think, the high point from the second half of the album. It stops the second half of the album from being easy to ignore for me, because I could quite happily listen to the first 7 tracks and sort of be done with it.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought Feels Right was one of the lesser songs from the second half of the album, but maybe part of it is because a lot of the songs are very much structured the same. They're all very much your 3-minute pop songs.
Yeah.
That I suppose maybe fatigue can be a bit of a problem. The full edition is 15 songs, which, I mean, even though it's only 48 minutes long, when you're hearing the same structure again and again and again, I suppose it can wear a little bit thin.
But I mean, overall, I do really enjoy this album. I don't think it's the best pop album I've ever heard by some margin, but it's definitely some of the most fun I've had listening to music this year.
It's very enjoyable.
Yeah. I would give this a 6.
I give it a light 7 out of 10.
I haven't mentioned For Sure, another one of my least favourite tracks, but that's because I just find it very unmemorable and I have nothing to say about it. But that's towards the end of the album, so if you're sensible like sensible people are like me, you will listen to the first 7 tracks and then dip like hummus.
Oh, why did you have to? Oh, curses. Very cursed lyrics.
It's made me want to go and listen to more of Carly Rae Jepsen stuff, because this is apart from Call Me Maybe, this is the first thing I've listened to by her. Mm-hmm. I've heard Emotion is a good album. Maybe I'll have to go and check it out.
Perhaps we shall.
What are we moving on to now, Joe?
We're going to move on to the new album by Holly Herndon called PROTO.
You very much wanted to speak about this one. I believe the words you said were, I strongly believe we should talk about this album.
Well, yes, because it features some of the most interesting uses of songwriting this year, is my opinion, on this album. So this album, PROTO, is mostly kind of experimental glitch pop, broadly speaking, but it includes elements of choral music, chamber music, and tribal music as well, to help bring out some of the songwriting elements and the themes that Holly is trying to highlight within the album, which all works really well. We'll probably get more into those tracks in a second. I mean, broadly speaking, this album isn't just a sensory listen, it's an abstract listen with themes about the nature of humanity and not necessarily the meaning of life, but the search for meaning itself.
I find the story behind the creation of this album far more interesting than the album itself, because the album is created primarily through the usage of artificial intelligence. It's a program invented by Herndon called Spawn. It's sort of like a chess-playing computer. It's able to learn and improve upon itself with each subsequent performance, and these progressions are very unpredictable, not in the way that, say, a game of chess would be, because music is such a abstract concept. So the AI was fed all these choral recordings and then spewed them out onto a pop template. And I think that some of the tracks on this album are fantastic, especially Alienation and Eternal, and also to a lesser extent Frontier. They sound fantastic, and the best tracks are the ones where you can clearly hear the influence of Herndon and Spawn combined together. But to me, a lot of this album just isn't fun or pleasing or particularly interesting to listen to.
Okay,
like even
interesting.
even in a way that I can admire the craft of what is happening. Like Crawler, for example, is just like, in my opinion, it's really unpleasant.
No, it's the best song of the year so far, Crawler.
It's like
It's a close harmony. You got this close harmony of voices. It's in that song. There is a blur between the machinery and the program that Herndon uses, and it blends in nature in a way to question how natural humanity is and the way it works within the context of the album. And then when it eventually fades into the polyphonic arrangement of Why Am I So Lost, it's symbolic of a complete struggle to find identity. And the momentum and the composition of the song works so well to that extent.
I think it's very difficult to be able to tell how much of it, like the composition on this album, is actually intentional, considering it's generated by artificial intelligence. And on this track, and Fear, Uncertainty, Doubt as well, it sounds to me like a machine trying to emulate human emotion rather than form some sort of symbiotic relationship with it.
So Fear, Uncertainty and Doubt is the second best song on the album. But it's partly because it is Herndon's influence, because what makes this album work so well is the contrast between each of the individual tracks, which of course Herndon would have arranged herself, the order of it. Like, you've got this narrative coming through in the first few tracks. Birth is very sparse with these weird electronic noises, and it becomes gradually apparent that they're vocals that have been manipulated. And then it goes into the next track, Alienation, which is suddenly very maximalistic, as if this, whatever this abstract concept is trying to reach out and fill all of the space and trying to find itself. And then that is contrasted again with the third track, Canaan, which is so stark in its minimalism. It's just two voices within what sounds like a cathedral. And that's such an interesting songwriting choice, because it's evoking this imagery of religion and the structure that religion imposes on chaos. And it's all part of this way that humanity leans towards trying to find meaning and structure in their life. And it carries on throughout the album to pretty much all the way through this theme of trying to find identity and structure in chaos.
I mean, originally I thought the theme of the album was the idea of AI trying to feel human consciousness and reeling at the pain of it. This was before I knew about how the album was created, so I guess I was close in a way, but just the more I think about it, the more it just feels like an excuse for some tracks that I find difficult to listen to.
But that's no, Nick, that's my point. It's not just a sensory experience, it's an abstract one, it's an abstract narrative.
I find it difficult to engage with an album where I have so little idea of how much of the creative process of it is intentional.
It is. I think it's very intentional. I mean, there is of course, you mentioned the program that generates some of the music, but that's just the paintbrush, really.
Is it?
It's the paintbrush. It's choosing the colors, but how it's arranged is still being I was going to say architected, but that's not a word. It's still being constructed by Herndon.
As in
the narrative of the album. The narrative of the album, and yeah.
It sounds like if Björk was upgraded by a Cyberman.
That sounds awesome.
This album isn't for me. I mean, I also find some tracks like Swim and Last Gasp, I mean, just dull to listen to. And listening to it while thinking about the context of the album and trying to glean meaning from it doesn't make it any more of an experience I particularly want to come back to. And then you've got
Swim does for me, because it has that major sounding tone. You've got gorgeous harmonies with the upbeat feeling, and it's just, and the lyrics about someone just needing to belong is a very is a very nice and more human break from of course, the stretch of tracks that come up to it. The only track that I don't really get anything from is Godmother. That is the only weak point on the album, in my opinion, because it doesn't really add anything to the narrative of the album.
I think Godmother is one of the most uncomfortable listening experiences I've had this year, but at least I found it engaging where a lot of the other tracks I didn't.
No, everything else is so engaging.
Well, I'm sorry that
And
I don't
lovely.
agree with you.
And lovely, and there's so many interesting compositional elements in this album, like Evening Shades. You've got this big chorus of vocals sounding like they're being washed over by waves. There's so much that can be gleaned from that in terms of the collective communication and how it gets drowned out. And so many of these tracks offer so much. It's incredible. But I feel like we need to stop fighting. Have you said what you want to say about this album?
I mean, I've tried to. I would give this a 5 out of 10.
This is the best album of the year so far, in my opinion. It's the easiest 9 out of 10 I've given this year.
You've given more than one?
I gave The Comet Is Coming a strong 8 to maybe a light 9, and I think it is maybe a light 9.
I think we've had enough of talking about computer music. So let's move on to talk about an experience which didn't involve computers and
Yes.
was done by humans primarily, and there were 3 of them, and they dressed up as Victorian droogs in face paint.
Can you guess who we're talking about yet?
We went and saw the Tiger Lillies
Yes.
a couple of days ago.
Yes, on the 30th of May at the Old Rep Theatre in Birmingham.
Yeah, they played through the entirety of their new album, Devil's Fairground, which we hadn't talked about on this podcast because we knew we were going to go and see them at the point that we realised that that album had come out as a live album. I mean, the Tiger Lillies are certainly a interesting, blasphemous, kind of scary group.
Yes, but they're awesome.
They are awesome. I appreciate the fact that from there being just 3 of them, they can create so many different sounds on stage.
I think because the live album Devil's Fairground is done with an orchestra as well. But in this show, it was just the 3 of them, and they managed to fill out the soundscape really well. And they were all multi-instrumentalists, which, you know.
Yeah, and there were some very funny moments as well on stage.
My favourite was when the bassist just got out a saw and looked menacingly at Jacques.
And then proceeded to make some very pleasant sounds using it as a singing saw.
It was brilliant.
You've also got the drummer who definitely used the kit to its full capabilities.
Oh yeah,
it wasn't a huge kit, like, you know, 1 snare, 1 low tom, and then a few cymbals around, but then also a glockenspiel and various pans. It looked like, and he was very entertaining to watch.
Yeah, and he'd really go for it as well, and create. He was versatile in as much he was creating ambience with it as well as beats, so it all worked really well.
Yeah,
and of course Martin Jacques is just he's a delight.
Yeah,
that's one way of putting it, but he is.
But the audience that we saw it with could have been better.
We were in front of in front of us was one screaming woman when the requests.
Yeah, they
got announced.
The penultimate track they gave over to the audience to request, and she was screaming for Auntie Mabel, which I'd never heard before. And then during the song, she was talking incredibly loudly to her friends, and I think she might have had a bit to drink.
She definitely had.
Yeah. Also, most of the audience were middle class, middle-aged, and found any instance of Martin Jacques swearing to be absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, especially during, I think it's Gypsies, where it ends with the word fucked, and it's really not an appropriate time to laugh considering the nature of the song, but of course everyone did.
Yeah.
But the Tiger Lillies themselves, they were great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were very entertaining, and then they came out afterwards and sold the merch, and many people had photos with them.
Yeah, they seemed like a cool, chill, group. So
and they managed to get the entire audience shouting the word drugs.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah,
yeah. Highlights from the concert. Really enjoyed Drugs. I liked Cut as well. I think Martin Jacques enjoyed that as well because he got to stand up and like do a bit of movement and
Yeah.
well, movement in as much as like signaling people cutting them their throats.
And
So,
when they did do Auntie Mabel, they were very comedic on stage with some of the actions they did, such as when they're talking about rubbing Auntie Mabel's thighs, the bassist started scratching at the bottom of his double bass.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Joe,
it was a good...
Joe is wearing the t-shirt that he got from the gig.
Is that all there is?
Which was
Title
the
of these, yeah.
Armtape penultimate song they played.
Yes, it's such a good word.
I've heard that the Gulag Keeper James is going to see them in a few days.
Oh yes.
I wonder what he'll make of it.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see if he successfully manages to request Snip Snip.
So overall, great concert.
Overall, great concert, yes.
Let's move on to King's Kaleidoscope with the new album Zeal.
Yes.
So you introduced me to this one, Joe.
Yes, I listened to this album and I was like, Nick, you might want to check this out. It's pretty lit.
I've got in front of me a checklist for a good pop album. So first of all, good but not overwhelming vocals. I think that's a check.
Yep.
Catchy tracks, check. Emotional tracks, check. No filler, check. Not overly long or short, check. Production is pretty good, check. Then I've got some additional checks for ways this album goes above and beyond. So, super interesting and bold compositions, check.
Yep.
Brilliant and passionate lyrics, check. Completely transcends the worship song genre by avoiding every single annoying cliche, check.
And that's probably the biggest bonus for this album.
Yeah.
And it's what makes it stand out so much.
I mean, the main point I've got for this album that is at the end of the day is this album makes me wish at points that I felt the same faith that he did, which is about as big a praise as I can give it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It's a worship album.
Yeah. Worship, it's a Christian album, and a lot of the lyrics are based in, I suppose, Christian symbolism, and the songs are about, for a large portion, about his faith and his relationship with his religion. But I think what makes this album so good is that it's not just like praise Jesus times infinity. Like the lyrics are genuinely good.
Yeah.
They explore the complexity of his relationships with his faith, and that's what makes it so compelling.
The song Backwards on this album has got my favourite lyrics of the year at the moment, which is the opening lyric. Struck out on my quest, turned around and took 2 steps backwards.
Yeah.
I love that line. I think that's such a great way of visualising the idea of faith.
Yeah, and I've noted down those lyrics as well, but it goes on. I'm sick and tired of church and chess. I take the wine and leave the bread. I'm jaded in the wilderness and trying tricks to not confess. I mean, for people who don't really know much about Christianity, that might not mean much, but someone like me who kind of grew up in it, I just found it very powerful. I liked it a lot.
Worship music often relies on the same specific melodies and chord patterns that are overused in a lot of popular music as well to provoke feelings that trick the listener into believing that they have felt some sort of connection to God through giving them like goosebumps or whatever. They also have to like appeal to the masses by being relatively simple so that they can have this impact on as many people as possible. And, you know, the lyrics are nearly always exceptionally on the nose, like, so you know exactly what it is that's impacting upon you. And I just love that this album avoids all of those things. Like,
yeah,
I didn't realise it was a faith album until like 4 tracks into my first listen, and it didn't ram it down my throat that this is what it was all about. And I think it's all the more endearing for it when you realise that it isn't necessarily functioning as a tool for conversion. It's purely the product of someone desperate to record his experiences with his religion and faith.
Yeah, and that's what just makes it seem so genuine and therefore enjoyable. I just want, on your point of how it bucks the trends, the opening track, The Coma, like immediately sets out how, I suppose, odd this album is. These kind of janky keyboard notes, and halfway through it gets enveloped with this swell of brass and woodwind. It seems almost like a bit more like an indie folk album in that way.
Yeah.
And
even with the more sort of bold composition on the album, I think there's just plenty to love about many of the tracks on this album that will appeal to a wide and diverse audience, so it still achieves that goal.
Oh yeah, like the first half of the album takes more of a, I would say, rock approach. I mean, I say that pretty loosely. I mean, Naked Feet and Holy Fire has those guitars and the rock structure. Hero Over My Head has a great splattering of instrumentation, but it sounds kind of indie rockish. But then I kind of like how the album goes on, especially in the last stretch. It gets more orchestral, and it feels like you've got a nice symmetry in the album of going from one to the other. It has a nice bit of diversity.
It's a good journey.
Yeah, it's a good journey.
I'll mention some of the negative points, and there really, really aren't many. I think at its worst points, maybe the album sounds a little overproduced, but that's a very rare occurrence. At these points, there's just a little bit too much going on that the messages the album is trying to convey get a little bit lost, I think. I also think A Little Bit of Faith is a bit of a weaker ending than any of the prior 4 tracks could have been, but that's not much of a complaint.
I agree with you, but then I've also put in my notes that I almost feel like the album's earned it at that point. I do agree with you, it is a little bit of a weaker track, but I feel like after Chad Gardner has expressed all this emotion so eloquently, to bring it back down to something a bit more standard to close it off I do think it's a bit earned.
I don't think it's a terrible ending at all. Like, I can think of other tracks on the album that would have been worse, but I just think that any of Rush trilogy could have been better. I've got one more tiny complaint, which is that Aimless Night, which had potential to be one of my favourite tracks on the album, the drums in the chorus just sound really bad.
I didn't notice.
I didn't notice until, like, because I was sort of getting swept up in it, and then I was listening to it the other day, and I was just suddenly like, oh God, oh.
See, Aimless Night is probably it's among my favourite tracks on the album.
I still really like it.
It's the orchestral swells are so triumphant and grand, and it's also got my other favourite lyrics on the album. I'll read them out. Demon Diamond, where are you hiding? Keep me on a mission like a singing siren, ripping up roots, digging up truths, hacking at the vine, stacking up dead fruit. The imagery of hard work for little return I just thought was really striking in that verse.
Yeah, he's so good at that.
Yeah.
His lyrics are great. I don't think there's a single bad track on this album, actually. I haven't written any in my worst track section.
I mean, there are some lesser tracks, like I said, A Little Bit of Faith, potentially Same Blood. Is it like they're good songs, but probably don't stand out just as much?
I think that the best songs on the album are really good.
Oh yeah, like we've mentioned Backwards, which is one of my favourites. Another one of my favourites, About to Break.
I love the percussion in that.
Oh, the percussion is so good, and it's so driving and impactful, and the hook is great as well.
I think Hero Over My Head being the second track on the album, coming after the Coma, which is like, it's, you know, Joe's mentioned it. It's sort of a swelling track. It sort of builds up into the album, whereas Hero Over My Head just hits you really hard. It's such a great burst of energy into the album. And then you've got the Rush trilogy of 3 tracks, and all of them are so good.
They're so good. It starts off with this piano arpeggio sample. It's almost like borrowing a bit from ambient hip hop in a way, like bits of ambient hip hop, bits of indie, and as it goes through the trilogy, you get more orchestral moments, and it transforms into something really quite beautiful at the end. In the part 3, the orchestral swells and flourishes are very, very dope.
I love this album. Like this album for me gets an 8 out of 10. It could even go up to a 9 at some point with repeated listens, I think.
I've been feeling the same, because when I first heard it, I was like, yeah, this could be an 8, but it seems, the more I think about it, the more I just think it's really is one of the best albums I've heard this year. It could go up to a 9. If I'm being generous, I would give it a 9. Yeah. So it's definitely in that range.
I was feeling the same way, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely in that range.
Like, it's just, I don't know, like, I if I can get on board with A Little Bit of Faith being the final track to close the album, I think that would push it up to a 9.
Yeah. And all I will say is definitely don't be put off by this being a Christian album. No. Give it a go. Be open-minded. Give it a go, and I'm sure there will be something you'll love on this album.
Yeah, if you're not going to accept the faith the same way that he does, at least accept that he is feeling so passionate about it, and that makes good music.
Yes, definitely.
One more album to go, Joe.
One more album to go.
Just one more.
Oh, but it's a good one. It's a very good one.
It is a very good one. This is one that I showed to Joe.
Oh
Because
yes,
sometimes I provide the good music.
yes, and I can confirm very very good music. We are talking about This Wild Willing by Glen Hansard.
So Glen Hansard is an Irish folk singer slash songwriter. This is his fifth album, if you discount the soundtrack to the film Once. It is 12 songs and 64 minutes long, so fairly
Yeah.
lengthy. In fact, I think I'll start off with a negative on this album because I have a hell of a lot of good
There's so
stuff to
much
say
positives.
about it. So the compositions on this album are very full, and the average track length is 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So it's a bit like having a really nice meal at a place where the portions are just a little bit too big to stomach.
Yeah.
And you want to eat more and more because it's so nice, but at the end of the day, you just end up feeling a bit. Ugh.
Yeah, because I'll say right now, I don't think there's a bad track on this album,
no.
but when you get to the end, you do kind of feel
You
like
need to take a nap.
you kind of feel, yeah, it's enough. Thank you, thank you.
I also think that with this having too much to stomach, like the starter course on the album, sort of the first 3 or 4 tracks, I think is the course that you would probably enjoy most. I know I did. So after that, like when the rest of the meal
Yeah.
isn't quite as good, you're left feeling a bit.
That being said, there are quite a few tracks after the first 3 which I like just as much.
Oh, yeah.
That I like just as much. But we'll get into that. Let's talk about the
Let's talk about the good things.
Let's talk about the first 3 tracks. I mean, I'll Be You, Be Me. It starts off with this quite disarming lo-fi bass and drums, and softly, he does this throughout the entire album, so softly and dynamically builds in the layers until at the end of the song, it's just this cacophony of, oh, this is great.
Like the first time I was listening to that track, I was walking home from work, and I just didn't even realise just how much it had built up.
Yeah, and it does it so softly, but the crescendos are there, and it's gorgeous.
And it's so unexpected from
Gorgeous.
Glen Hansard if you've listened to, I mean, as far as I'm aware, his previous work, 'cause I've only listened to music to the film once and a couple of tracks from some of his later albums, and this album is a hell of a lot more brooding and produced than those are. As well as that, Glen Hansard is just a fantastic vocalist. He's got some of the best control over his vocals of anyone I've ever heard.
It's almost like ASMR vocals at times.
Yeah, so here
softly...
he takes a more laid-back approach on this album. I think there's only one track where he really belts it out, which is on Don't Settle.
Don't Settle. And it's so good when he does.
Don't Settle is another contender for favourite track of the year.
It's
me.
I love the dark, ominous, dramatic piano riff, and it's unrelenting. It keeps going, and then as the verses move on, once again the dramatic strings they come in, and then boom, it hits you. I think it's after the second chorus, these grand strings and cacophony behind them.
The trumpets.
Oh, it's so good.
And
And he's just shouting, "Lest you forget!" And
yeah,
oh, it's so good.
he builds up the lyrics in that track so well as well. I think that the lyrics on this album have a really nice flow to them in general, and all of them are well matched at every turn with Hansard's beautiful, beautiful voice.
Yeah.
For example, in the track Mary, just skipping ahead, it's got love is a language you can speak so eloquently, and I've never heard such a melody as when you address me, Mary.
That is my favourite
I've never
lyric.
felt so sweet, a kiss put on so gently, as love bears fruit, it's taken root, and is growing inside me, Mary.
It's so lovely. I will say, I didn't really note any lyrics from the album apart from that one. I think that was the one that stood out to me. I mean, there are other good lyrics on the album.
I think the lyrics are completely serviceable to the main thing you're going to be paying attention to, which is the compositions. I think. I think the lyrics are just a sort of a nice touch. It's not what you're going to be focusing on as much as, say, in King's Kaleidoscope's album. Talking of the compositions, the layering on every single track on this album is exceptional. Hansard makes full use of every instrument at his disposal and creates textures that are just completely overflowing with warmth, even at its bleakest moments.
I mean, talking about warmth, one of my other favourite tracks is Brother's Keeper. I
love that.
I love the change of mood because it uses the Mixolydian mode, which is one of my favourite modes. It just, the first half of the album is quite dramatic, can get quite intense, and then Brother's Keeper rounds off the first half of the album with this kind of bright and very just relaxing mood, and the guitar's just
it's got
so
such
nice.
a great rhythm that guitar does. It just never lets up, and yet it never feels like it's rushing. somehow. It's so odd.
It's lovely.
I think on top of like the production on this album is also really good because when you've got such grand compositions on this album, like it's very rare that anything gets lost.
I know you can hear everything so crisply,
Yeah.
and it really services the compositions as well because you can hear all of the details.
Because there are a
yeah.
fair amount of really interesting instrumental choices on the album. I
Yeah.
mean, this comes through for me most obviously on Race to the Bottom.
That's another one of my favourites.
It has so many instruments in it that I just can't count.
Yeah, and there's some kind of Eastern European motifs going on in the counter melodies as well, and it's really good and ominous and good. And the lyrics on that track is probably another highlight for me as well, describing a race to the bottom.
But then at the end of the third track, Fool's Game, you've got this verse which is sung in Persian, I believe it is, which is just beautiful.
It's lovely.
And that track, after the first two, which, you know, they swell and build up and they're really grand, on the third one, it's really, like, it's a MacGuffin because it starts off being a lot more soothing and continues that way for about 3 minutes until you'll hit with just, it's just one of the best explosions of music in a song I can think of.
Yeah, just think post rock suddenly, just in a folk album.
Post folk.
It's great. I mean,
and it's so unexpected. I mean, even if it has happened in the first two tracks, but sort of more stretched out, here it's just overwhelming.
It hits you, and
it's absolutely
great.
Flooring.
Yeah. I have one other favourite track that we haven't mentioned yet, which is Weight of the World.
That's also one of my favourites.
Which is 7.5 minutes long. It's one of the lengthier tracks on the album, but it starts off with this aleatoric piano. And it just seems to be, for the first part, it seems to be this exercise in atmospheric folk music. But it's all done so gorgeously, and you can hear all the details about it. And it kind of puts you into a false sense of security because Glen Hansard, he's still working on his gradually increasing and putting things in, but the way it's so stretched out and his falsetto is absolutely beautiful on that track. It's probably, other than Don't Settle, is my favourite vocal performance from him personally. And towards the end you get these synths coming in that sound so chilling, and it's just such a great experience overall, that track.
It's a very sublimely tranquil track, even as it builds, and it's gorgeous, like, to immerse yourself in it. Yeah, I think just in general, this album's, like, if you were to apply a colour palette to this album, it would be delightfully rich. I think there is a decent amount of variety on this album, which is kind of unexpected.
It is very varied, but I still think it still has a very core pastoral palette, is what I would say. But it's very rich and detailed and harmonious.
I was going to mention just one more track, which is actually the final track, Leave a Light, which is a complete return to his folk roots for the final track, and is just the loveliest warm send-off.
Yeah,
I think it's about as good a final track as you could possibly have on the album.
Yeah.
This is another one which I'm going to give an 8 to, but it could very easily become a 9.
See, this is the same for me, because I kind of feel like he could have just taken out a couple of they're not bad tracks, but songs like The Closing Door, Threading Water, perhaps even Who's Gonna Be Your Baby Now, they're not quite as striking as some of the other tracks. And maybe if he took them out. On
any other album, there'd still be superior tracks, I think, but it's just this. It sounds so good, Joe.
It's so good.
There's just so much of it.
And there's, that I kind of think, just kind of maybe trimming just a little bit, get it maybe to about, under an hour, maybe 50, 55 minutes.
I do think it's an album that does need to be slightly longer, but maybe not quite as long as it is. Like, it wouldn't work as a 40-minute album.
Oh, no. It needs to be a full album, but not as quite as full as it currently is.
I just really want to go and listen to Fool's Game now, Joe.
I know, Nick. I understand. I relate. But other than that, like, hardly any complaints. It's a fantastic album, and you know what? I feel like I'm giving it a 9. In fact, King's Kaleidoscope gets 9 as well. Today I am generous, Joe.
Fine, I'm going to do the same. Both getting a 9.
I think, is this the first time I've given 3 9s on a podcast? I think anyway, I'm very happy today. Generous Joe is pleased.
That's 3 9s that I have this year now. I'm very pleased because I only had 2 last year and we're only halfway through the year.
Yeah, and we're getting some good ones. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it's so good. I love this album. I'm very tempted to pick it up on vinyl if I can afford the shipping from Europe.
Oh.
I might have spent a fair amount of money on another vinyl which is going to arrive tomorrow. Which is Deaf Consciousness by Have a Nice Life.
Oh.
I'm so excited for that one.
Oh, yes, that's awesome.
I've recently decided that Earth Mover might be just one of the best tracks, period.
I mean, it kind of is. There's no arguing with that.
So, I mean, it's been 2 months, Joe.
It's been 2 months.
So there are quite a few other albums that we haven't talked about in full, but I feel we do need to mention.
We should shout out.
So we should talk about sort of the more popular ones and some of the ones we've really liked. So I'm trying to think how long ago was the last album that we mentioned on the podcast. Did I mention Laura Stevenson last time?
I think you did, but we'll mention her again.
Yeah, Laura Stevenson's The Big Freeze. I love that album. It's so good. I'd also like to bring up Lizzo. Lizzo's new album, Because I Love You, is very enjoyable fusion of R&B and hip-hop. The new Otterboke Beaver album is just so energetic and fun.
I listened to that, and while punk isn't my genre, I did find it enjoyable. So
it's the inner weeb in you.
Inner weeb in me.
The new album by Secret Band, LP2, it occasionally drags a bit, but it's very impressively produced, I think.
Yeah.
Mac DeMarco's new album is not good.
It's not good at all.
No, it gets a 4. It gets a 4 from me just because of the final, elevated from a 3 because of the yee-haws in the final track.
Same.
I like that. Tim Hecker's new album, Anoyo, which is very fluid. You have to listen to it in one go because all the tracks meld together, and it's got some really great Eastern influences in there. That's probably my favourite electronic release of the year. The new Parak and Singh album, Science City, I was a big fan of. I really liked. I listened to their song Summer Skin, which was released last year but is on this album, and that's one of my favourites of the year. I recommend that. Unfortunately, I think they've gone on indefinite hiatus now due to anxiety problems, which is sad.
That's unfortunate.
The new Big Thief album, Youth Off, which Joe didn't like much, but I think is a strong 7 out of 10. Abnormality's new album, Sociopathic Constructs, gets a 3 from me. You can't hear anything on that album. It's so badly produced and it's grind metal. You can't have both because you can't hear anything.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the point.
The new Injury Reserve album is exciting and interesting and intense, and I think it has a couple of weaker tracks, but at the same time, it's got some really interesting ones as well. Judah and the Lion, with their new album Pep Talks, gets a 2 out of 10 from me. Imagine dragons with banjos.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I didn't dislike the album as much as you, but it's still a bad album.
It uses folk instruments as a novelty, and I hate that.
Yeah. I can imagine.
It's got terrible lyrics as well, bad composition, and is just generally a joke. They've got a song on it called Sports, where the chorus is, "My head is shaped like a basketball, and I'm going for the rebound. Sports, balls, sports, balls. We love sports." So bad. And if you want to listen to one of the worst songs of the year, listen to You Don't Mess With My Mama, because that is a train wreck of a song. The National's new album, Joe, what did you think of that?
I was
it's good, but it's not National good.
I was personally disappointed, and while I enjoyed the album while I was listening to it, when I came away from it, I felt like I didn't really get that much out of it. So
yeah, I'm feeling a strong 6.
Yeah, because when I first listened to it, I was like 7, but then when I come away from it, I'm like, no, probably a 6, unfortunately.
I don't have much to say about the new Rae album, but I feel like you probably do.
Yes, because I really enjoyed it. It's not game changing by any means, but it's one of the most lush albums that I've heard this year. So check it out.
Yeah. Tyler, the Creator's new album, Igor, which we thought about talking about, and then I'm not sure why we decided not to, because it's a big album release, and I think we both quite liked it.
Yeah. I think it's a good album. Interesting one for Tyler.
When you get over the fact that there isn't any rapping really in the first half of the album, I think that it's got some really good beats, and it's definitely an interesting direction for him to take, and some of the tracks are great on it, but I also think that the last two tracks are not good.
I agree.
Some of them are kind of forgettable.
I think approach this as though it's a kind of Clarence Clarity style pop album, and I think you will be pleased.
Yeah, don't expect another Flower Boy.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
New Vampire Weekend album, Joe. What did you think of that?
I thought it was right.
Yeah, same. I mean, it's over 15 tracks long, which instantly raises red flags for me. I know it's not the longest album, but I think generally if your album is over 15 tracks, it's going to suffer for it. Give it a 6. I mean, it's got Harmony Hall on, which I think is a fantastic song. I love that
some
one.
Good tracks. I mean, strong 6, light 7, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Did you listen to the new Warforged album?
I have not.
I mean, it's very interesting at some points. Like, it's got some of the best metal moments of the year on it for me, but at the same time, it does rely a bit too much on quiet, 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 loud, quiet, 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 loud, and it's also it's an hour and 15 minutes long. Like, please don't do that.
No. Flying
Lotus's new album was a disappointment for me.
Unfortunately, yes. While it's one of those albums, again, while I enjoyed it, after coming away from it, I don't really feel like I got anything, I suppose, new out of it.
Yeah.
Or
I like the track Fire Is Coming, but that's pretty much the only one I can actually remember from it, and that's just because it's got David Lynch doing a voiceover on it.
I mean, hearing Thundercat play is always a delight.
Yeah.
But unfortunately not as good as some of his previous work.
2 more albums I want to talk about. First of all, the new album by Psychedelic Porn Crumpets, which, with their new album, and now for the whatchamacallit, which are, I mean, they wear their influences far too broadly on their sleeve. I mean, at some points you could very easily mistake them for King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, but, the album's a hell of a lot of fun. There's a song on it called Bill's Mandolin, which I love. And finally, the new Rammstein album, which, I mean, they just sound like a Eurovision metal act to me.
Yeah, I was not fond.
I don't care for Rammstein very much, honestly. Sorry. And we are coming now to the end of the poddy.
Yes.
I hope you enjoyed our return to talking about new albums.
I mean, I certainly did.
And thankfully this time we weren't held under lock and key by the Gulag Keeper. Yeah, that was scary. Let's never do that again.
No, never.
No. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I have been Nick.
I have been Joe.
And you've been listening to F Sharp, A Sharp Revisited.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. F Sharp, A Sharp.